Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. There's both good news and bad news regarding dementia. Fewer people are suffering, but a new drug to fight Alzheimer's didn't work. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Eli Lilly took a big chance running a trial on a drug, solanezumab, that had flopped in previous studies. It didn't work this time either. What went wrong? What could you do to help your brain stay healthy?
Some medications that we take for granted may have unexpected serious side effects. Pain relievers can increase your chance of a heart attack. Heartburn drugs might raise the risk of a stroke.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, we welcome your calls and questions about the health news that matters to you.
First, the news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, inadequate sleep can make drivers more hazardous on the highways. A new study from the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety reveals that losing as little as an hour of sleep can impair attention, slow reaction time, and reduce accuracy. The researchers used data from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration covering approximately 4,600 traffic accidents. Compared to the recommended 7 hours of sleep, drivers getting less sleep were at elevated risk. Those getting 4 or fewer hours of sleep were 11 times more likely to crash their cars. Driving drowsy is as risky as driving drunk.
Cannabidiol oil from marijuana may help control epilepsy. Researchers presented study results at the 70th annual meeting of the American Epilepsy Society. They found that CBD oil reduced seizures in both children and adults. In addition, many patients also had less severe seizures. The 42 children and 39 adults all had hard-to-treat epilepsy, and most achieved significant benefit with CBD oil. Cannabidiol does not have psychoactive properties, so people don't get high on it the way they do with THC-containing marijuana. Other researchers reported that CBD oil may interact with other drugs, including the anticoagulant warfarin, as well as other anticonvulsant drugs such as topiramate. Anyone considering CBD oil for intractable epilepsy should be under careful medical supervision.
Nuts are not the dietary demons doctors once thought. There was a time when we were warned to stay away from nuts because they are high in both fat and calories. A new review of 20 studies has just concluded that people who eat more nuts are less likely to have heart disease, strokes, or cancer. They're also less prone to premature death from lung disease, infections, and diabetes. Those who ate about an ounce of nuts daily were 29% less likely to have coronary heart disease and 21% less likely to have any type of cardiovascular complications. None of these studies were randomized controlled trials, although experiments have shown that nut consumption lowers triglycerides and cholesterol in the bloodstream. This analysis shows that peanuts are associated with similar benefits as tree nuts.
For decades, we've been told to reduce our overall fat consumption. In particular, saturated fat consumption has been considered a risk factor for metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. A new study from Norway suggests that fat in general, and saturated fat specifically, may not be such a dietary disaster after all. In this carefully controlled study, overweight, middle-aged men were randomly assigned to follow either a very high-fat, low-carb diet or a high-carb, low-fat diet for 3 months. Both diets had the same amount of calories and protein and included many of the same minimally processed foods. At the end of the trial, both groups had lost weight and had reduced waist circumference. The response to the two diets with regard to belly fat and insulin resistance was similar. So were risk factors such as triglycerides, blood pressure, and blood sugar. One of the investigators, cardiologist Otto Nygaard, commented, "The very high intake of total and saturated fat did not increase the calculated risk of cardiovascular diseases."
Proton pump inhibitors like lansoprazole or omeprazole are the most popular treatments for heartburn and reflux disease. The FDA considers such drugs so safe that it has approved medications like Nexium, Prevacid, and Prilosec for over-the-counter sale. But new side effects are still being discovered. Danish researchers analyzed medical records of more than 244,000 adults. They found that those taking PPIs were 19% more likely to experience a stroke over the following 6 years. The higher the dose, the greater the risk. This was an epidemiological study, so cause and effect have not been established. The investigators suggest a follow-up clinical trial to confirm the results. In the meantime, patients are urged to take PPIs only for serious digestive disorders and for as short a period of time as possible. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist.
I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist. Today, we're going to hear some good news and some bad news about Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Murali Doraiswamy is professor of medicine and psychiatry at Duke University Health System and a leading expert on Alzheimer's disease. He'll share the latest research.
But first, we're going to talk about some unexpected hazards of drugs you might take for granted. We'll start with common pain relievers. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, are among the most popular pain relievers in the country. Not only do doctors write tons of prescriptions for these drugs, like ibuprofen and naproxen, but they can also be purchased without a prescription, Advil, Aleve, Motrin IB, or as an ingredient in other products. Maybe you take one of these either once in a while or pretty frequently to deal with pain. How safe are they?
Well, if you have had an experience with an NSAID, we'd like to hear from you. Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. Do you have a favorite NSAID? If so, which one and why? Have you ever experienced heartburn or other side effects? You can share your story or ask a question at 888-472-3366. 3366. You can also send us email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or get in touch by way of Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy.
The American Heart Association met in New Orleans a few weeks ago, and Dr. Steve Nissen, who is a frequent guest on the People's Pharmacy and is chairman of the Robert and Suzanne Tomsich Department of Cardiovascular Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic, reported on a large multi-center study that he supervised. It was called Precision. And what he and his colleagues found is that Celebrex, celecoxib, is no more dangerous than naproxen or ibuprofen when it comes to heart attacks, strokes, and death from cardiovascular disease.
Well, that sounds like really good news. For a long time, doctors have thought that naproxen is really pretty safe. So why did they do the study?
Well, it all goes back to Vioxx. So dial back to about 2000, 2001, 2002. By 2004, there were enough deaths associated with Vioxx from heart attacks and strokes that it got pulled off the market. Now, Celebrex is like Vioxx in the sense that it's what's called a COX-2 inhibitor, a selective inhibitor of this enzyme. So the question became, well, will Celebrex pose the same cardiovascular problems as Vioxx?
Well, here is what they did. And when I tell you all that they did, you'll understand why. When they started in 2005, they finally were reporting the results in 2016. The results were published last month in the New England Journal of Medicine. The study included more than 24,000 people. These people had either osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. Obviously, to get that many subjects, you have to have multiple centers. So it's a multi-center trial, and that means coordinating a whole lot of researchers. 8,000 of all of these people were each assigned randomly to take celecoxib, ibuprofen, or naproxen. So they have arthritis, they're in pain, they're given a drug to alleviate their pain, but they're randomly assigned to which drug it'll be. Every day for almost 2 years, they took their medication, and then they were followed up for about 3 years. And also, everyone knows that NSAIDs have a nasty effect on the digestive tract. So every single one of these volunteers in this study were also taking Nexium every day. And we'll get back to that in just a moment. Now, it turns out that a lot of people dropped out of this study. 68.8%, more than 2/3. That is a huge dropout rate. And we don't know exactly why.
Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. It has to do with how effective NSAIDs are at relieving inflammation and pain. But here's the conclusion, and this is the amazing thing. Dr. Nissen and his colleagues concluded, quote, at moderate doses, celecoxib was found to be non-inferior to ibuprofen or naproxen with regard to cardiovascular safety. Now,
non-inferior, I love that language.
Don't you love that?
I think it's a statistical term. It is technical. But non-inferior means no worse than. Now, is that really what you want out of your medicine?
Well, it's kind of fascinating. The idea that celecoxib or Celebrex is not worse than naproxen or ibuprofen was spun to be really good news. And in a sense, it is. It means that Celebrex is not as bad, I guess, as Vioxx was.
Yeah, it's not as bad as Vioxx. Interestingly, though, essentially what they learned is that naproxen really isn't as safe as they thought it was.
Well, yeah. I mean, there has been some rumors that naproxen, the ingredient in Aleve and a number of other drugs, prescription drugs like naproxen, was somehow safer for the cardiovascular system. And Dr. Nissen said, not so fast.
Not really. Not when you look at it. There's really no statistically significant difference among them. But when you look at the numbers, there are tiny amounts of numbers that show actually a few more people had heart attacks or other cardiovascular problems if they were taking naproxen.
Well, we'd like to hear from you. Have you taken naproxen or ibuprofen or Celebrex, now available generically as celecoxib? Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. We'd like you to share your story. Do these drugs work for you? Do they relieve your pain and inflammation? Do they allow you to function, or have you developed stomach problems or cardiovascular problems? Give us a call, 888-472-3366. You can email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
Are you ready to take a call, Joe?
Sure.
Let's talk to AC in Farmville, North Carolina. AC, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. You've got an NSAID story?
Yes, I take ibuprofen even after an accident I had. I was given it prescription. I don't take any narcotic drugs of any kind. And the ibuprofen is the only thing that works for me in my joint pain and taking, the pain out of my back, between the vertebrae in my back and my joint pain. Nothing else works. So that's the only thing that works for me, and it doesn't really give me any problems. I know other people have had sensitivities to it. That's the only thing that works for me.
Now, AC, has your doctor ever told you anything about possible side effects of ibuprofen?
Yeah, I know that it can do liver damage. I know that it can mess it, because I had an ulcer many years ago, and I took Tagamet, but I was on aspirin.
Uh-huh.
And but with the ibuprofen, I personally haven't had any problems, but I'm guessing that my personal metabolism is probably different from others, where I was reacting negatively to the aspirin.
Well, one of the things that you need to be aware of, AC, is that aspirin and ibuprofen are both NSAIDs. And I know that there are people who say, well, I can't tolerate aspirin, but I do just fine on Aleve or just fine on Advil, and that's cool, but you need to be vigilant. And so if you start to develop heartburn or if your stool turns dark, you probably should be in touch with your doctor. But we're glad it's working for you. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yes, and I think it's good that you made the point that different people react differently to certain medications. So that's very helpful.
Well, let's just run through the side effects of NSAIDs. So what do we've got here?
These are kind of scary.
They are kind of scary. We've got high blood pressure, hypertension.
We have fluid retention, edema, your legs swell up, your fingers swell up.
Heart attacks, strokes, and one that most people don't realize.
That would be atrial fibrillation, AFib. It's an irregular heart rhythm, and it can be quite a problem.
Congestive heart failure is another serious complication of all NSAIDs except aspirin. And by the way, aspirin reduces the risk of heart attacks and thrombotic strokes rather than increasing the risk. Now, there's also this thing called severe allergic reactions, and by that, Terry, they mean very bad skin reactions.
Absolutely, and these actually can be life-threatening or require hospitalization, things like Stevens-Johnson syndrome. So it's if you start to get a nasty skin reaction while you're taking one of these NSAIDs, you really need to be in touch with your doctor right away. Joe, you skipped right over the digestive problems.
Well,
NSAIDs are well known to potentially cause, stomach upset, but they can also cause ulcers, bleeding ulcers, perforation of the intestines or the stomach. It's a problem.
And as AC mentioned, kidney damage and liver damage. All of these are pretty serious complications of NSAIDs. Now, relatively uncommon, but when you've got 10 or 15 or 20 million Americans taking an NSAID every single day in and day out for weeks, months, or even years, it represents a pretty significant complication, Terry.
Well, that's absolutely right. And Joe, we really should tell people what else they might be able to do if they have pain. And some people are actually going to tell us what they do when they have pain, besides take a medication. But there's one medication most people don't know about, and that's one that you're particularly fond of. Not because you've been taking it, but just because you like its idea. Salsalate.
Yes, salsalate. It's an interesting drug that has much less potential to cause cardiovascular problems and less trouble to the digestive tract. Well, we'd love to hear from you. What about NSAIDs? How effective are they? And what do you do if you can't tolerate them? Have any of the home remedies you've heard on the People's Pharmacy worked? Have you tried gin-soaked raisins? What about turmeric, tart cherry juice? Let us know your solution for inflammation and pain.
Some people do Certo and grape juice.
Our number, 888-472-3366. If our lines are full, you can send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or reach us via Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. That number again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 888-472-3366.
You're listening to the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to the People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that moisturize deeply to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. It's show number 1061. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about the stories behind the health headlines, and we're talking a little bit about NSAID pain relievers today and how they may affect the cardiovascular system. Where are we going, Terry?
We're going to Tampa, Florida to talk to Lisa. Lisa, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. Your story, please.
Hi, Joe and Terry.
Hi.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, I used to work in the ER long ago in New Jersey, and I tell you, we noticed, me and the ER docs noticed a lot of people that were coming to the ER were somehow related to using the Aleve. So that kind of made me scared to use Aleve. I never will use that. I think it should be taken off the market, in my opinion.
Well, it's interesting you would say that, Lisa, because Aleve is naproxen, isn't it, Joe?
It is indeed.
And therefore, it's been part of this whole idea that naproxen is somehow a little bit safer, cardiovascularly speaking, than the other NSAIDs. But we spoke a couple years ago to a physician in Denmark,
Peter
Gertje, and he helped develop naproxen. And when we mentioned that naproxen was available over the counter in the United States, he was appalled. He said, it is such a dangerous drug. Now, that's his judgment. I'm not passing judgment, but it's an interesting perspective, and I'm glad to have your perspective, Lisa.
Yes,
thank you.
And Lisa, just out of curiosity, what kinds of problems were you seeing in the ER?
It was a long time ago. I don't really remember the problems, but they were pretty, they were cardiac related. They were kind of serious things. And I remember the ER doctors kind of, questioning, thinking, gee, there's a correlation here. A lot of these people are coming in and they've been using that Aleve. And he even told me, he says, you know what? I would not use that drug at all. And it's stuck in me for years now. I never will touch that drug.
Well, thank you for sharing, Lisa. We appreciate it. The FDA actually has warnings on all prescription NSAIDs. For example, the risk of heart attack or stroke can occur as early as the first weeks of using an NSAID. The risk may increase with longer use. The risk appears greater at higher dose. NSAIDs can increase the risk of heart attack or stroke in patients with or without heart disease or risk factors for heart disease. And there's an increased risk of heart failure with NSAID use.
But you won't find those warnings on the over-the-counter bottle.
You will not. Well, here's a fan, I think, of naproxen in Charlottesville, Virginia. Stephen, you're on the People's Pharmacy. What's your story?
Hello. My story, I guess, begins with I'm very active. I'm 47 years old, and I take Aleve daily. I start off the morning around 6 o'clock, sometimes as early as 5, and the very first thing I do is take 2 Aleve, and I've been doing that for 10 years.
Well, the commercials for Aleve are pretty impressive. If you've seen them, you may have remembered a phrase, all day long, all day strong, and they kind of promote the fact that you don't have to take a handful of pills. And you're taking it for what reason, Stephen?
I have arthritis in both knees and both ankles, and probably attribute it to heavy running and also play basketball.
And you want to keep on playing basketball.
Certainly do.
Well, so
I got that.
We are curious. No side effects, no complications whatsoever.
I have no side effects, and I have tried lots of things. I've actually been part of a knee arthritis research program as well. And during that research, I've tried lots of things that aren't even on the shelf yet. And during those trials, I've had to be off of Aleve while taking something else, and I've found that Aleve works the best for me.
Well, we appreciate hearing that, and we're delighted that you have not had any side effects. We would encourage you, for the length of time you've been taking this, of course, to be under medical supervision. Most of the over-the-counter pain relievers say take for about 10 days.
They say 10 days max, unless your doctor is recommending that you take this drug for long term. And as long as you're in touch with your doctor regularly, especially if anything starts to happen that's a little odd, then you should pay attention to those warnings.
Absolutely. And here's something I'm not sure most physicians or pharmacists warn people about. This was a study that came out a couple of years back, and it suggested that people with heart disease or if someone had a heart attack, they should absolutely stay away from NSAIDs. Here's the quote. Chronic use of NSAIDs should be avoided where possible until further data are available. Alternative modes of pain relief should be considered in these patients. And the conclusion from a study regarding heart attacks is that use of NSAIDs is associated with persistently increased coronary risk regardless of time elapsed after the first heart attack. We advise long-term caution in using NSAIDs for people who have had a heart attack.
Now, Joe, we've got an email from Dee. She says, I have treatable high blood pressure. She uses Diavan hydrochlorothiazide, but my blood pressure spiked several years ago when I was on Celebrex. It was dangerously high. After that, I'm not using any NSAIDs.
And here's a call from Hedgeville, West Virginia, from Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. You've had a similar problem, hey?
Yeah, every time I take a leave, my blood pressure goes up. And every time I take a leave, my blood pressure goes up. But I can take ibuprofen and I'm fine, and it works wonderful.
That is fascinating, Rebecca. And once again, it underscores what Stephen and AC have been telling us, that people do have specific and different reactions to some of these NSAIDs, even though, you know, the pharmacologists like Joe tend to think of them as a class of medications because they work similarly.
Exactly. Thank you so much for the call, Rebecca.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Now, here's the thing that fascinates me, Terry. In this study that Dr. Nissen was in charge of, you had 24,000 patients. So this is a big study.
It's a lot of people.
8,000 roughly taking ibuprofen, 8,000 taking Celebrex, 8,000 taking naproxen. By the end of the study, over two-thirds had dropped out. Now, presumably, they weren't paying for these medicines.
Right. So it wasn't a matter of cost. It was either that the medicines weren't working well enough for their arthritis pain, and these people had either osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, but they were in significant pain. Or else it was because they had side effects. And I really haven't been able to dig around in the data quite well enough to figure out which it was.
Well, that remains a mystery. We'll have to ask Dr. Nissen when we have him next on the People's Pharmacy. But, you know, one of the most common side effects of NSAIDs, whether they be aspirin or whether they be ibuprofen or naproxen or diclofenac or meloxicam or paroxetine, there's just a whole slew of them, is stomach upset. And we have some more news, and I'm afraid it's not very good, Terry, with regard to proton pump inhibitors, because PPIs are often prescribed to people who are given NSAIDs to protect their stomach from ulceration.
Well, and in fact, as we mentioned, every single patient in the Precision trial was taking Nexium to protect them from gastrointestinal side effects. And by the way, Celebrex was designed, celecoxib was designed to protect the stomach. And in fact, the people taking celecoxib had fewer, not none, but fewer gastrointestinal problems than the ones on ibuprofen or naproxen.
Well, we have new research from Denmark presented at the American Heart Association meetings in New Orleans, and they looked at 244,000 people, and what they found was that proton pump inhibitors were associated with an increased risk of strokes. The higher the dose, the greater the risk. Pharmacologists refer to that as a dose-response curve. You know what a dose-response curve is. If you have one glass of wine, you might feel, just a little touch of the alcohol. If you have 3 glasses, you might be feeling no pain, literally, figuratively. If you had half a dozen, you would be driving impaired.
You should not be driving, not even after 3.
A dose-response curve. Well, it turns out the more proton pump inhibitor on board, the increased risk of stroke. So, these drugs, like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are considered so safe, they're available over the counter. So now you can get Nexium 24-hour over the counter. You can get Prilosec over the counter. You can get Prevacid without a doctor's supervision. But there are some side effects associated with PPIs, Terry.
Well, there are side effects with PPIs. And of course, we should point out that the Danish study really established an association, so we can't say it's cause and effect. But the other side effects that are associated with PPIs include infections, and that's both lung infections like pneumonia and gastrointestinal infections like C. diff, which causes a really horrible diarrhea. PPIs can make it difficult for people to absorb certain nutrients, and that's a big problem. They can cause kidney damage. They can cause kidney stones. They have been associated with heart attacks, and just as scary as the strokes, I think, Joe, is that people who take PPIs long-term also have had a tendency to have a higher rate of dementia.
So this class of medications that we thought was so safe for so long, we're beginning to have some doubts about that. And the other thing that I think is kind of fascinating is we actually have a potential mechanism for the cardiovascular problems associated with PPIs. Terry, a couple years ago, there was a discovery about heart attacks. Do you remember that? Increased risk of heart attacks on proton pump inhibitors?
Sure, I think I just mentioned that.
Yeah. Now we have this increased risk of stroke. Well, the commonality may be reduced nitric oxide.
Oh, nitric oxide. The cells in the lining of the blood vessels make nitric oxide when they're exposed to certain things, and that makes them relax, and that makes the blood pressure go down. This is why chocolate is actually good for you.
Well, there are a lot of things that increase nitric oxide.
Yeah, beet juice.
Beet juice is one of them.
Spinach.
And they make blood vessels more flexible. They lower blood pressure. And as you say, this may be one of the reasons why chocolate is so good for you. So the bottom line is proton pump inhibitors appear, and it's still somewhat speculative, to counteract that beneficial effect of nitric oxide, which may cause what doctors refer to as endothelial dysfunction. Blood vessels become a little bit less flexible. So that's a potential problem.
Joe, we have an email from Hugh. He's listening from Arlington, Texas on KERA. He's going to be 81 years old next month, and he's taking medicine for cholesterol and high blood pressure. They're both under control, and he also takes a full aspirin at bedtime. For the past 10 years or so, I've been taking Pepcid Complete as needed to control my heartburn, which occurs several days each week. When it appears, it's usually between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or maybe in the middle of the night. With one tablet, the problem disappears. Is this medicine included in the risk of stroke list? If so, what could I use instead? It's really important to say that the Danish researchers actually looked at drugs like Pepcid. That would be cimetidine, famotidine, which is Pepcid, and ranitidine, which is Zantac, just to see whether there was something special about people with heartburn that was causing them to have strokes. And there was no association with H2 antagonists, which is what these drugs are called, and stroke. So
we can
Pepcid is good. Hugh, you can use it when you need it.
We can reassure you. Let's go to Blacksburg, Virginia. Hi, John. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. What have you used instead of NSAIDs for pain?
Well, I several years ago had an attack of gout, and I also have arthritis. So I combine dried tart cherries, golden raisins, and gin, and let those soak for a good week, and start eating them. And that's worked really well for both types of arthritic pain that I've had. I also have a clotting disorder, so most other pain relievers are a no-go for me with the warfarin I'm on.
Right. You have to be, you really can't take an NSAID, even aspirin, with warfarin.
Now, a lot of the health professionals who are listening are going, oh, come on, John. Tart cherries, really?
Gin-soaked raisins.
I mean, they can't be as effective as an FDA-approved medication.
Well, they can be as effective as for me as one, and I don't really care if it's a placebo effect.
As long as you're getting relief, right?
That's right. I think doctors should be able to prescribe placebos in a way, and I think a lot of the effect we have in every drug is partly a placebo. Just as much as it is maybe in the tart cherries and raisins.
That is a good point, John.
So I do it. It works, and it goes down easily. And it's a reason to stop and buy some gin today.
Well, if you need a special reason, that's one of them.
Now, John, you said both types of arthritis pain. So you have rheumatoid arthritis as well as osteoarthritis?
Well, I have gouty arthritis.
Gout, right. You did say that.
And I have osteoarthritis because I played soccer well into my late 30s down in Durham with Tom Wenger. So I played soccer far too long.
But it was fun.
My joints are concerned.
Well,
but it was good for your heart.
It
so there
sure
you have
was.
It.
Thank you so much for the call.
Better than the blood clots were for my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? As far as we know, gin-soaked raisins do not have cardiovascular complications. There's only 1 drop of alcohol in 9 raisins. And as far as we know, tart cherries is no cardiovascular risk there either.
Right. That's absolutely true. We don't know of any problems with tart cherries.
We have just about a minute before the break.
Renee in Morgantown, West Virginia, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Thank you. My experience is I am a former RN, so I have some health background. I'm very cautious about medications. I have some osteoarthritis, but I also have a very serious neurological disorder, complex regional pain syndrome. So I've been prescribed many different medications and was on, some years ago, prescription NSAIDs to see if it would help the CRPS, which it did not. My experience is that I would have no changes in my lab work, but I would get kidney pain taking NSAIDs. I try to avoid them. I do utilize CBD oil, turmeric. Occasionally I'll take aspirin, but I mostly rely on some simple remedies to help with my osteoarthritis.
Well, Renee, we're all out of time for this break, but thank you so much for sharing. And we appreciate this CBD oil. Terry, we're going to have to talk more about it. When we come back, we're going to hear about Dr. Doraiswamy's latest insights on research about Alzheimer's disease, what went wrong and what's going right. Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. You can reach us, People's Pharmacy, at radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
Exactly right. You're listening to the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy. If you like it, why not rate or review it in the iTunes store? We'd appreciate it.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions, helping dry, cracked skin feel utterly soft and smooth. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of the show, you can call 800-732-2334, or you can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. It's show number 1061.
Today, we are bringing you up to date on the health news that matters to you. We'll find out now about the latest research on Alzheimer's disease.
We turn to Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, professor of medicine and psychiatry at Duke University Health System. He's co-author of the Alzheimer's Action Plan and a frequent guest here on the People's Pharmacy.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Murali Doraiswamy.
Great to be back.
There's good news and some bad news on the dementia front. Dr. Doraiswamy, I wonder if you could tell us about this study in JAMA Internal Medicine suggesting that between 2000 and 2012, the number of people with dementia has actually fallen, and pretty significantly.
Yeah, this is great news, and I think it's a true finding because we've seen similar findings from studies in the UK and in Germany. So at least in the developed world, the rates seem to be coming down. And in this particular study, the rates decreased by 24%. If we had seen that kind of an effect size with a drug, we'd be calling it a cure.
Oh, yeah, it would be. There would be a lot of excitement. Do we have any idea what's driving this decline?
We don't. The best guess is that it's probably due to lifestyle changes, better education, better brain health, better management of vascular disease such as heart disease and diabetes. That's the best bet. And if that is true, then that is indeed good news because it suggests that there is a significant lifestyle contribution to dementia that can be managed through lifestyle.
As I understand it, heart disease also has been on the decline, so perhaps they're going together.
Correct.
So now to the bad news. There was a lot of hope in a study conducted by Eli Lilly. It was, I think, their third study of this drug, and we'll ask you to make your best guess at how to pronounce it for us. Tell us what went wrong.
So the drug from Eli Lilly was called solanezumab. It was a antibody targeting one of the key pathologies in the Alzheimer's brain called amyloid. And in this case, it was trying to sort of harness the brain's immune system to attack and clear these amyloid proteins in the brain. So in the case of Lilly's compound, it was targeting a form of amyloid called soluble amyloid. So the soluble amyloid, you can think of it as a solo form, and then the solo form of this protein sort of aggregates and forms clumps. So they were trying to target it before it formed clumps. This particular trial, the negative result was not a surprise for the field because an earlier trial was also negative, and sort of Lilly found a subgroup within that earlier trial that they claimed had some results, even though their subgroup analysis was not widely accepted. So I don't think the latest results are a surprise, at least to me and most of the experts in the field.
Now, most of the medications that have been tested recently for Alzheimer's disease have been aimed at diminishing this amyloid or beta amyloid protein, and most of them have not been successful. Are we barking up the wrong tree?
Yes, I think we may be barking up the wrong tree, and to put those numbers in perspective, it's quite staggering. Since 2000, we've tested something like 250 compounds, and we only had one drug approved in the last decade, and that drug does not act on the amyloid mechanism. So what that's really telling us is that our theory about what amyloid plaques are doing in the brain may be totally wrong. So the initial thinking was that plaques were bad. They sort of formed these clumps in the brain that jammed communication. They destroyed nerve cells, and it was a very sort of simplistic hypothesis. I think we're now beginning to realize that amyloid is not all bad. In fact, there may be a protective mechanism. A recent study from Harvard showed that amyloid might have an antimicrobial effect in the brain. So they actually injected some microbes into a test tube model of Alzheimer's disease, and they showed that amyloid clumps rapidly formed to try to sort of protect the brain against these infectious agents.
So maybe we got it all backwards. Maybe amyloid is actually trying to protect us from some sort of inflammatory reaction, perhaps even infectious. Do we have any ideas about where the future is for people like you who are neuroscientists doing research in this area about other ways of attacking this disease? Because even though dementia rates seem to be dropping, there are still millions and millions of people who are affected. Families' lives have been destroyed. Help us understand where we're headed in terms of research and if there are any bright spots on the horizon. Yeah,
so I think the biggest bang for the buck is probably going to come from prevention. and I'll get to that in a second. But the field is not yet ready to write off the amyloid hypothesis because just around the time that Lilly's negative results came out from their earlier trial, another company called Biogen announced very successful results from an early phase trial of another drug targeting amyloid. And that particular drug was called aducanumab. And in that particular trial, the drug reduced amyloid plaques in the brain and at the same time produced cognitive improvements in a dose-dependent fashion. In fact, it was the very first trial to show that reducing amyloid plaques in the same individuals resulted in cognitive improvements. So that result sort of suggests that there may still be some hope for that class of drugs, and Biogen is now conducting a large-scale phase 3 trial to confirm those findings, and so there is still hope on that end. I don't think we're ready to write off the amyloid hypothesis. But to answer your bigger question, I think really we're going to have to target the disease early. I think we're going to have to target the disease through a cocktail strategy. It's not going to be a simple sort of one-drug cure. It's going to be like AIDS or cancer, where it's going to be messy, where we're going to have multiple drugs targeting different mechanistic processes to get a small effect. And then we're also going to have to address some of the lifestyle issues, such as heart disease, vascular disease, obesity, diabetes, that may play a role in dementia.
Dr. Doraiswamy, we do frequently hear from listeners that there's dementia in the family and they would like to not get it, and what can they do to avoid it? So we'd all like to know, what can we do to reduce our likelihood? We know there's no promises, but to reduce our likelihood of developing dementia.
So the two studies that came out that are highly encouraging in that regard have very interesting names. The first one is called the FINGER trial. It's kind of almost like giving a finger to dementia, if you will. So the FINGER trial was a trial conducted in Finland where they looked at a multimodal lifestyle intervention. In other words, they said, we know all of these different sort of lifestyle strategies might help. Let's put them all together in a package and see if this package truly can reduce your risk for dementia. So they put participants through exercise several times a week, brain training through a computer program several times a week, put them on what's called as a Mediterranean diet. So it's a relatively sort of low-fat diet, which is rich in colored fruits and vegetables with 2 or 3 servings of fish, largely unprocessed types of foods. And then they also very strictly made sure that they controlled things like hypertension, high cholesterol levels, etc. So when they followed these people over a 2-year period compared to a control group that just got some health advice, they found that there was a 25% improvement in cognitive functioning amongst the group that got this lifestyle intervention. So sort of following a heart-healthy lifestyle with regular exercise, with very stringent management of vascular risk factors, combined with brain training, I think these are still perhaps the most promising avenues to reduce your risk.
Tell us, if you would, a little bit about brain training.
So brain training is sort of the earliest foundation for brain training, comes from studies showing that people who are highly educated may be less likely to develop dementia, even though their brain is sort of filled with the pathology, like the plaques and tangles. So people with less than 8th grade education have a much higher risk for developing dementia, and we don't know why. So one of the theories is that there is something called cognitive reserve. That is, through regular engagement in cognitively stimulating activities, you can build up redundancy in the brain that can then protect you from the effects of diseases such as Alzheimer's or mini strokes. So typically, brain training can be administered through, doing meaningful things. So you could sort of attend lectures, you could take workshops to learn a new skill or hobby, such as playing chess, learning dancing, singing, playing a new musical instrument. Or you can do something that's far more systematic, like a computerized cognitive training program where you subscribe to one of these services, and then you systematically sort of cross-train different areas of your cognition, such as your memory, your reaction time, things like that, using video games. And this area has been somewhat controversial because a number of companies made early claims that were not substantiated by good clinical evidence. But the best study in this field that came out was called the ACTIVE trial. The ACTIVE trial was a trial that looked at 10-year outcomes of brain training. And they put people through 3 different kinds of brain training. One is memory training, the second is training in reasoning abilities, and the third is training in speed, reaction time and speed, and the fourth was a control group. And just this year, they announced a finding that pretty much surprised the whole field. They found a 33% reduction in the risk of dementia in one of the groups that got brain training compared to the control group. So this was a pretty shocking finding for the field because the field thought, brain training is all fluff and it's snake oil and there's no real evidence. So this study has really made us sit up and take it more seriously.
Dr. Doraiswamy, what about avoiding bad stuff? I mean, we know about the lifestyle approaches that you've mentioned, healthy diet, exercise, all makes sense. But we've heard a lot lately about medications that have what are called anticholinergic activities. So a lot of the PM nighttime sleeping pills, the Advil PMs, the Tylenol PMs, they all have diphenhydramine, a drug with anticholinergic activity that affects the acetylcholine system in the brain. But there are literally dozens, if not scores of drugs, prescription and some over-the-counter, that also do the same thing. How concerned are you about such drugs? Very, and especially in the nursing home setting, where a number of drugs that are used to treat agitation, that are used to treat even depression, some of the older drugs, do cause cognitive impairments. Cough syrup, Benadryl, anti-allergy medicines. There's a list of about 40 or 50 drugs, mostly older drugs, used to treat nausea, vomiting, urinary incontinence. A number of these drugs can have a significant effect on memory. And over time, some of these could potentially become permanent deficits. So the good news is, I think, if you stop these medicines, much of the cognitive impairment is reversible. So it's very important to talk to your doctor about whether you might be on medicines that have anticholinergic properties, which is what you mentioned. And these tend to be the older, cheaper medicines by and large. And that's unfortunate. Dr. Doraiswamy, as you look into your crystal ball, what does the future hold in terms of research, and what are you and your colleagues most excited about? So there are 3 areas that I believe we should focus on as a nation and as a field. The first is we spend relatively less on Alzheimer's research compared to other diseases such as cancer and heart disease, and we've made great strides in cancer and heart disease, and now I think it's time for us to really emphasize research in the area of Alzheimer's. We need to double or triple our current research budget. The second is I believe that the evidence is now pointing towards Alzheimer's as an autoimmune disease. And what I mean by that is we don't know what is the trigger for Alzheimer's. We, of course, need to find that. But whatever the trigger may be, whether it be microbes, whether it be something else, a head injury, we believe that there is an inflammatory and an immune response generated by the brain that may be exaggerated, and that in turn leads to Alzheimer's. So if we can somehow target this and understand the mechanisms behind it, I think we will find the cure for Alzheimer's. The third thing which we didn't touch upon is women currently bear a disproportionate burden in terms of both caring and in terms of the numbers that are affected by the disease. I think we need to really do a lot more in terms to improve the societal infrastructure to caring for people, both sort of while they're living at home and while they're living in facilities. And I think it's very important we understand why there is a sex difference. And if there is a sex difference, I think that may in turn give us some clues as to how we can prevent Alzheimer's.
Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
You've been listening to Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, professor of medicine and psychiatry at Duke University Health System. He also served as an advisor to leading government agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups. And his news is quite exciting. Prevention, there's the key.
It is very important. And if you'd like to know more about which of those drugs, those anticholinergic drugs that he was talking about, you will find a list of anticholinergic drugs on our website.
At peoplespharmacy.com. Let's go to Martinsville, Virginia. Hi, Ray. We only have a minute left. What's up?
I don't even need that. Heartburn, use a teaspoon of vinegar. I use Bragg's organic vinegar and cut out the sugar and refined carbohydrates from the diet.
Okay, so you cut the sugar and the refined carbs from your diet right away. That's going to help. How do you take the vinegar?
I take a teaspoon of it, maybe two, and when I have the heartburn, I don't have it that often, and it burns instantly, and it's gone instantly. The pain is gone.
And you just swallow the teaspoon. You don't put it in water or anything like that?
I don't. But
okay.
You can take a swig of water afterwards.
You know, a lot of people are going, Ray, he's crazy. I mean, the last thing you'd want to swallow if you have heartburn is vinegar.
Oh, it's wonderful. I know it's counterintuitive, but believe me, it works, or it works for me. So
you know, we actually think there might be a mechanism to explain it, but
yes,
thank
there
you.
is. I mean, there's a sensory thing at the beginning of the stomach. I think it says, hey, we've got too much acid here, let's shut it off.
I think you might be onto something. Ray, thanks so much for the call. Terry, do you have an email or a tweet?
Well, I've got a couple of Twitters. I've got a series from Sammy who says, I have a spinal cord injury, took ibuprofen at the max daily dose for years and developed stomach problems. Can't take any more. So I switched from ibuprofen to Tylenol. It's not as effective. So now I take medical marijuana in place of the Tylenol. Still need Lyrica for the nerve pain.
And here's Dana in Malakoff, Texas, who says a spoonful of yellow mustard gives him relief from acid indigestion.
And Gail has sent us a tweet that says, I'm writing to say I take meloxicam for back pain and omeprazole for acid reflux. Could one cause the other?
And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Well, that's all the time we have. Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Sophie Copeland provided technical assistance. Al Wodarski's the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
If you'd like a copy of today's show, you can order it by calling 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1061. You can also find it at our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
Next week, neurosurgeon and horse trainer Alan Hamilton. You won't want to miss it. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.